Oh, I like to freestyle, man.
I love that too. And I'm on a call with Julien Pinot. How close was
Exactly.
that? You like it?
Actually, it was very good. Yeah, it's actually very good.
I'm sure a lot of people screw that pronunciation up.
Yes,
Wh-
they do.
where are you from originally?
I grew up in Paris. So I'm
Okay.
from France, right? I grew up in Paris and I left, I was about like 14, I think.
Where do you live now?
All over the world. I don't have a home base. Right now, we're just traveling like 2 to 4 weeks in one place and then we move on to the next. So right now I'm in Montreal. Actually, I'm in Canada. And
Nice.
then I'm going to Australia and New Zealand for 2 months.
Wow. So that's interesting. So you're like a gypsy
Yeah.
roaming around the world. Now, when you do this, you travel with your family, or they're all old
With
enough?
my daughter.
Nice. How old is she?
No, she's 13. So
Okay.
I'm a single dad.
Right.
So I have to raise her and the business as well.
So this is really interesting, and this is more about me getting to know you instead of vice
Yeah.
versa. But um, my son, he's 26 right now, but I grew up in Montreal, which you probably didn't know,
Oh,
which is
no, I
why
did not know
which is
that.
why I pronounced your name so perfectly. Uh,
Yes, that's right.
Montreal French is not Parisian French.
No,
Uh,
it's not.
no, but my wife is fluent, and they all make fun of my French, but je parle français un peu.
They do.
But
Voilà. Avec l'accent.
guess what? I also was a single dad for many, many years, and I raised my son and grew my business. This was back 20. I got custody of him when he was a month old, and I
So you did all the work then.
yeah,
Jesus
yeah.
Christ.
And I used to joke around like I was like I don't know if you remember the old samurai video, Samurai and Son.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
they were great,
I
so
do.
violent. Yeah, but
Yeah.
but
Yes, right.
that's really my life back then. I remember my mom saying to me, "Hey, listen, the relationship, we weren't married. It was just boyfriend, girlfriend. But the relationship didn't work out, and you're going to do what other single men did. You'll see your kid on the weekend, and I said, no, that's
No way.
no way.
I
And
said no.
yeah, good for you, man. And I got so a lot of similarities there, and I got custody of him, which was really rare back then, even for today to get
Yes.
custody.
Even today, it's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, and I took him everywhere. He traveled the world, and I was like you. I remember one year I was on the road like 262 days. It was insane.
Yeah.
And but it's neat because the reason I contacted you, and this my podcast is about life. It's about understanding a more holistic approach to how we think. Let's not be fixating. Let's not be myopic. Let's self-actualize. And I've discovered after almost 40 years of teaching and training and coaching and researching that the secret to a lot of this is understanding physiology, physics, and psychology, and how they intertwine. But also, the biggest thing, if somebody said, I got an hour to spend with you, are you going to show me finger splayed outside 90? Or what are you going to show me? Like, I go, I'm going to teach you how I believe we should look at fear, how I wish somebody had taught me to look at the psychodynamics, the psychology of fear, how it impacts my emotional, psychological system, because that influences all movement. And
yeah, and actually, very interestingly, now there's something called the polyvagal theory, which they are bringing that physiology aspect to psychotherapy.
Interesting.
Like finally, we are recognizing the fact that fear has more than a physical impact, that influences our mind as well. I know it sounds obvious when I say it like this, but this, from the longest time, it was just that the mind is, mind, body are completely unrelated almost.
Right. And I've been saying for years, the mind navigates the body. How you think affects how you feel affects how you, excuse me, affects how you think. And then both of them influence how you move.
Exactly.
And so I started hearing your name from people that were training with me and training with you, saying, "Hey, you guys need to link up." That there's one of the first things that I heard was your connection or fascination, or the way you looked at the way we used to move back in the
Yes.
day. I joke around. I say, one day I was asked on a show, what I thought what the best martial art for self-defense was. And I said, my friend, art is for a museum. The way people fight is not how, it's not like a painting in a museum. It's ugly. It's messy. And I said, how do you think cavemen fought? Like there wasn't a caveman like kung fu studio and a caveman karate studio. I mean, right? Cavemen fought using a primal gross motor, core to extremity type explosive movement, and has to resonate with the fear and the danger. They weren't being complex motor skill driven. They weren't trapped by some stylistic preference. It was pure survival. And that's how I reverse engineered my system. And I've read and heard some connections to that with respect to how you look at functional movement.
Well, yeah. For me, it was. I mean, this was a long conversation I had with physios and chiropractors because I deal with them as well, right? In what I do, and I had a few simple points when it comes to evolution. Right? I was like, how come we are not defining movement based on the guidelines evolution gave us? Like, wouldn't that make sense somewhere to maybe consider the guidelines we've been given? Because 300,000 years of evolution has to give us some kind of rules.
Right. And what was the I hope we didn't just freeze there. Stand by. You just froze. Stand by.
On the video. Oh, still there. Okay, cool.
Yeah, sorry, you froze. Let me tell you where you froze. Okay, right after you said 300,000 years of evolution guidelines. So pick up.
300,000 years of evolution, basically, because you know how evolution works. So we are the winners. That means a movement you have never seen before, you are not designed for.
Nice, I like that.
And so, how come we are not taking this into consideration? For example, we all do the back squat for training, right? And I was like, okay, so what's a back squat in nature? Because they were telling me the squat is the most important exercise. I was like, okay, so we have the hinge pattern, like pivoting at the hip, and we have the squat. Okay, so what's the squat pattern in nature? I'm not talking about sitting down to take a poop because that's passive, right? Right. I was like, in an active movement, what is it? Okay, so I can only think about the jump.
Okay.
Right, that was the only movement. I'm like, okay, do you need to break parallel to jump? I was like, no. So, okay, so find me a position in nature where you need to create power with your hips are below your knees. And I can't find one. So I was like, okay, then if you cannot find one in nature, why are you telling me the best way to train the hips is to do exactly that? I'm not saying we can't do that. I'm saying this should be part of the conversation. Right. If evolution has never found an occasion to put us into that position, why are you telling me that this is the best way to train the hips? Since the hips are not made for that position.
Right.
Shouldn't be a conversation we should have at least, right? And so I was like, so then it tells me the squat pattern, which is now we're going into torque and everything, but you're telling me the movement you are teaching might not be the best, like the bottom of the squat, creating tension at the bottom of the squat might not be as simple as they make it to be. And so I started to go from that perspective, and then that led me into external torque, being bad for the squat, blah, blah, blah. But it was a simple
observation
fact like that. Yeah, observation like that. There was another one too, is if you look at the way they talk, every problem when it comes to joints is always the small muscle groups, never the big ones.
Okay.
So they all like nervous system and joints. I'm like, okay, so I have a simple questions. What are muscles for? And they could not answer me. Huh. Muscles are to create movement. So joints don't move muscle move joints. I'm sorry. Someone has to start. Okay, who starts? Nervous system, okay? Is the nervous system connecting to the joint, or is it connecting to the muscle that connects to the joint? I'm sorry, what moves the joint? The muscle. I was like, so then how come the problem is never about imbalances in the large muscle groups? Like there's a very famous physio who said that imbalances in large muscle groups will not affect gross movement pattern. I'm like, if I'm wrestling you, it will. Huh. Like you can do as many pull-ups on your own as you want. If you wrestle me and I feel a weakness on the right, I'm taking you down that way.
Right.
So it will make a difference.
I
right?
love
It's
it.
not movement. It's not just you moving. It's dealing with your environment. If you have basically a large muscle group deficiency on one side, it will influence the way you move according to whatever happens to you in nature. So therefore, there's a problem. And yet, we never talk about the deficiencies of large muscle groups. Things you would face in nature all the time. It's called wrestling. First sport invented. It wasn't even sport. That's how we train, basically.
Right.
But, yeah, so those are simple observations that yet do not enter the conversation when it comes to movements. And then it keeps on going like this again and again and again and again. We have created an entire system of training that does not exist in nature. Like even exercises like the squat, the press, things like that. The press doesn't work quite as simply as they tell us. For example, someone is close to you, right? And you want to bump him. You use both hands and you bump very, very violently toward external torque close to you. But the second is away. That's a punch. That's going to be unilateral. You're not going to punch both hands at the same time. So you're going to bump both hands, but you're going to punch only one hand.
Right.
So bilateral and unilateral movements are completely different. It's not the same idea. It's not the same torque chains. It's coordination versus explosiveness. It's not even the same nervous system.
It's
interesting.
So
there's an entire thing there.
Yeah. And that was my epiphany in the 80s, doing drills where I had students of mine, we called it a sucker punch drill, where they put on gloves. I only had a mouth guard and I was just recording VHS tapes back in the day. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to just see how close is too close. And then, I honestly thought that I was going to be able to, because of my skill and experience, that I was going to be able to do proverbial wax on, wax off, And there's a gap between stimulus and response where the brain just goes, fuck. And I got hit. I got the shit punched out of me for an hour. And at the end of it, I had swelling under both eyes, bleeding in my mouth, headache. I'm sitting there afterwards thinking, and what I noticed was every time I startled, flinched, every time my physiology said, hey, fuck off, we'll take care of this. Mm-hmm. Your complex motor skill is too slow, that there's a distance and a gap. And that's when I first started looking at physiology, cross-extensor reflex, and recognizing this relationship. And I loved what you were talking about joint, muscle, nervous system. And then the bigger picture was that if you've got a debilitating amount of fear, where you're fixating on failure, you're thinking about the wrong outcome, whether it's a lift or whether it's an outcome in a self-defense measure, that affects your whole nervous system, which changes your breathing, which changes your physiology, which changes your expression of power and speed.
And it's going to affect which muscle you use. So that's what I discovered on my side is, so by the way, did you notice when you're too close, you'll go both hands at the same time, never one?
Yeah. And I don't know if you've seen my spear system.
Yes.
That's always, someone gets too close, both hands come up. Yes. And then our movement is always a double palm pop, but we're aiming for the head.
Go ahead.
No. You explain it. I want to hear it through your filter.
It's because you're in the sympathetic nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system, that's external torque, is bilateral movement. The sympathetic nervous, so I can explain. There's two kinds of torque, right? There's external torque people talk about all the time, and there's also internal torque, right? So internal torque, it's not as much rotation of the joint as much as how do you create tension, right? So you're going to create tension toward the inside, like a punch, right? That would be internal torque, and then you create torque toward the outside. That's pushing away, just like when you bump someone. Right. So I've been able to link those two to the nervous system.
Okay.
Which means it's a long conversation, but one day we'll have it when I meet you.
Yep.
Everything that is external torque like this is a sympathetic nervous system. If we look at the chronology of the sympathetic nervous system, that is the first one we got. That's the one we got that is 1 million years old. That's the vertebrae side, right? So basically that's dealing with fear. That's the fight, flight, or freeze system.
Correct.
That's the sympathetic nervous system. And if you look, that is the thing that makes you act in a bilateral movement, which means both hands together, jumping in the air. If you jump in the air, it's always both legs, right? It's lifting something heavy where you need to be angry, fear, or fight. It's in between your legs like a sumo. It's still external torque.
Right.
If you go towards something that is coordination-based, that's a flow state. That's basically unilateral movement. Now you're talking about sprinting, like not the jump off the block, because that's both legs. You're
Right.
talking about one leg, activate, and then now that's when they need to be calm, relaxed. If you look at punching, you need to punch relaxed when the guy is at a certain distance, and then you don't punch with two hands, you punch with one hand.
Correct.
So whenever you go toward internal torque, you go toward the parasympathetic nervous system. That's where flow state comes in. That's where you can strategize. But whenever you go to sympathetic, which is fear, which is fight, flight, like whenever it gets too, basically you cannot remain calm anymore, you will see that you go to both hands because you're going to a bilateral movement. So the nervous system you're in will challenge basically your muscles in the type of movement in a specific way, and you cannot escape that.
It's very fascinating, and it's in my experience, and we've never talked before, and it's interesting because you know, when I reverse engineered the SPEAR system, and SPEAR is an acronym for spontaneous protection enabling accelerated response, and it's all about understanding the physiology and the physics and the psychology during a sudden ambush. In a sudden ambush, there's a startle flinch. The startle flinch is triggered by the body's need to disengage from the noxious stimuli, according to medical sciences. That's all SNS, sympathetic nervous system. And what I tell people, I go uniform across the board, whether you're male, female, irrespective of your age or your background experience. You can be trained military, law enforcement, martial artists. If something happens suddenly in front of you, both hands come up to protect your head, sympathetic nervous system response. You go to cover the head, the command center, and then immediately both hands will push away the danger. What we figured out how to do is weaponize the flinch. And so we tell people, look, this is just like an organic airbag deploying in a modern car. That something hits you because an ambush is always SNS, where if you agree to a fight, it can be parasympathetic.
It's a whole different, yes, exactly.
Right. And now now you can be Muhammad Ali and plan your dance and your strategy and move. But
not that first second. Yeah, not that first second.
Of
you notice too, when people get ambushed, they jump.
Say that again?
When they get ambushed, when they get scared, they jump.
Right.
Both legs.
Right.
It's because they're going into the squat pattern, which is external torque, which is sympathetic nervous system. So anytime you get scared, you jump because you're going toward external torque. So what I discovered basically is like the way the muscle are trained and built can also influence the degree to which you respond in sympathetic nervous system, which means if you only train the external torque muscle, you're more likely to go towards sympathetic, therefore you're more likely to get scared. Okay. It's a three-way street. We used to think that the mind designed the nervous system, the nervous system designed the body. And now the polyvagal theory is starting to say the nervous system has an effect on the mind. What I'm saying is the body also has an effect on the nervous system that has an effect on the mind. So, for example, if I train, I've noticed that if you train only external torque, you can make people more nervous. I'll make you a workout in external torque, and you'll have a lot of like sympathetic. So you have a lot of like that nervous energy, for example, that would allow you to do emails all day, but not write philosophy. So we have workouts where we finish, where if you start working out in the morning, I'll make you finish toward the sympathetic workout so that you have that energy all day where you need to go to work and be more task oriented and that fight need basically. But if it's at the end of the evening, I'll make you do a parasympathetic workout using internal torque so that I can zonk you and make you go to sleep.
That's fascinating.
The way you train the muscles can also influence the nervous system. That means that if I'm only in ET, I'm scared all the time. I only rely to like freaking out all the time. It's going to be much harder to go into that state where now I need to strategize past the first few seconds.
Yeah, and it's very beautiful and philosophical, but it's not surprising if you understand stuff. It's like listening to classical music before bed, or listening to heavy metal. And we all know, I'm sure you've read and heard about the influence sound has on our brain. Yes. So that's very, very interesting. I like that a lot.
But it seems even which ear, like they're doing a study for the polyvagal theory right now about there seems to be one ear that is responsible for filtering noise from when the bear is coming, so that's sympathetic, and one ear that is toward the parasympathetic, which is a social interaction. So it seems that you're listening to people with one ear and listening to the bear coming with the other.
Interesting. Have you read any of Norman Doidge's books on the The Brain That Heals Itself. It's all on neuroplasticity
No,
and
not yet.
research. It's fascinating stuff. What we're still in the last 5 to 10 years, what we've learned about the brain and its relationship to the nervous system and so on and so forth. And it's interesting. There's I don't know if you ever if you remember Maurice Smith. He was a world champion.
Yes. He beat Mark Coleman. He was the first one to beat Mark Coleman.
And so I was buddies with Maurice back in the day, and I always study anybody who wouldn't. And one of the reasons that I invited you on the show is, it's not a show about fighting, unless metaphorically we think about the fight of life. How do we handle our own confrontations in our mind, like, breaking through obstacles, mental obstacles, and stuff like that. But anytime I meet somebody or hear of somebody that's doing something very unique or special, I check that out and I go, this is somebody I want to meet, and how can we meet? Through the internet. Great. We have an initial conversation. Well, I got to meet Maurice, and anytime I would be near a real fighter, I would ask them about fear. And I would try to create a conversation that was different than, like some of the questions people ask fighters are just so stupid. Like, what are you going to do? What's your strategy here? And it's like, well, I'm going to keep that a secret until after the fight. Thank you. Right. So,
yes.
And so I'm with Maurice many, many years ago. And I told him, I said, hey man, it's great to meet you, big fan. And, I believe this was pre UFC. So he was like K1 Thai boxing.
I remember him. Yep.
And, I said, I study fear and, blah, blah, blah. I said, and I was asking about his pre-fight rituals. And I was with him one time where he's like lying on a massage table, headphones on, and he's just listening to R&B. He's just chilled out, really relaxed. Yeah. And in the changing room is another guy who's walking around punching himself in the face. Another guy who's sitting down on a chair and his leg is, going 100 miles an hour, because he's like, and I'm describing this in my seminar. I go, so here's the conversation I had with Maurice. I said to him, hey, can I ask you a question? He goes, yeah. I said, I study fear, and you don't look like you are exhibiting any fear, any signs of fear, no body language for fear. Do you not feel fear before your fight? And he looks at me and he goes, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah, sure. Go ahead. He goes, do you have a job? I said, yeah, I do. He said, are you afraid to go to work? I said, no. He said, me either, and puts the headphones back on, right? And it's like a cool line. It's a cool line from a movie, but imagine, and this is what I explain to people, is imagine if I had taken Maurice's playlist and walked over to the guy that was listening to death metal and put it on.
Work. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And you get this, but I want our listeners to understand this, that if I had said, here's a guy who's a world champion, you should emulate what he's doing, that guy gets knocked out. That guy gets fucked up in his fight, because the ritual that gets us from A to B is not the same as the ritual that gets us from B to C. Our self-awareness changes. And you can't just magically give me your playlist, I'm going to win a fight. Everyone would have lost that fight. So it's a fascinating thing when you it's all about state, your emotional state, and psychological state, but understanding this, what I'm getting from this is a strategic, like looking at the day and before you decide what your training is going to be in general, is relating it to the SNS and the parasympathetic and going, okay, listen, you've got to go to bed. We're not going to, have you do some crazy workout that's going to, put you in that fight or flight mode. I love it. I think that's super cool. It's a next level. It's just not random.
Yeah, but because it causes some problems, because I don't know if you know, but I'm an MMA guy.
Okay. Well, I knew that you had a passion and background. I don't know what your background was, but I knew that you had done martial arts.
Black belt in jiu-jitsu, man.
Nice.
Okay. So, but I remember, like, technically I'm a brown belt because my teacher never gave me my black belt. So technically brown belt. I had to take weeks off of jiu-jitsu because I couldn't sleep at night. Like, literally, there were moments in my training where, because I would be so ramped up from jiu-jitsu, that I couldn't sleep at night. So I couldn't train for weeks just so I could catch up on my sleep. But I understand now that for example, like instead of doing like drills and then sparring for an hour with as you get tired, the guy is trying to take your head off and you get more ramped up. For example, how about we do something like sympathetic, which is sparring, but then drill is more like parasympathetic.
Right.
And so we alternate sparring and drilling. And then we finish with 20 minutes of drills so that when the person leaves, is not in that state of heavy metal, I'm going to kill someone.
Right.
How about we, by learning to deal with the nervous system, we learn to deal with people better. Because most people, when they want to train jiu-jitsu, for example, like me, they need to sleep at night. So those are the things that matter, because otherwise we can't. So we need, by studying the nervous system, we can make the entire training world so much better.
Interesting.
But that's by understanding how evolution got us here in the first place. We have to stop. The fitness world is very strange for that. It's like we are not asking the important questions, the one that truly matter. For example, when you're scared shitless, everybody thinks because they punched the bag and they did like 3 jiu-jitsu that they're going to do well in the fight. I'm like, fighting in the cage is not fighting in the bar. You are never in the mood. So what happens when the guy comes and insults your girlfriend? Everybody thinks they're a badass until they actually have to do something. Those are the important questions you never face when you train. So everything became like a sport in MMA, but not the true question like that you face all the time. What happens when you get scared shitless? Because that's what they think they're tough enough to control that. I got news for you. You can't. It's a 1,000,000-year-old defense mechanism that you cannot shut off.
Right. I love it. I dig it, because this is my big thing. We have so many people who don't understand what we do, and they have what I wrote a little piece called the unconscious bias. And I go, like, you don't know, you're going through a filter where people confuse martial arts with combat sports, and then they confuse combat sports with bravado douchebag fights. And then they confuse that with real violent encounter. The real violent encounter is always started by the bad guy in the street, and it's always an attack on your emotional, psychological system.
And he's ready. And that guy is ready.
Right, exactly.
He's not going to go into the face of fear that you are, because he already went through it.
Right.
He prepared himself mentally for it.
Interesting.
He's not going to have that 3-second freeze.
Right. Right. And then the way I describe it, I tell people, you can't match the adrenaline dump of the bad guy in a real sudden attack, because he's already started the attack. Exactly. You have to catch up. Your cognitive brain has to catch up, and it's got to regulate your physiological system, whether it's breathing, whether it's converting the flinch, whatever it is. It's interesting. It's very refreshing to talk to somebody that just gets it right away. Because
people don't understand. The guy has been there. He's probably looking at you for the last 15 minutes.
Right.
And he decided to attack you. So he's been there for a long time. Whereas you're not deciding shit. It's happening to you.
Right.
So there's a passiveness that comes to it, and people don't understand what freeze is. Right. So people always talk about the sympathetic as a fight or flight.
Right.
That's not true. It's fight, flight, or freeze.
Right.
Freeze is a perfectly natural response to certain situation. It's called playing dead.
Right.
It's actually useful in certain situation, not when the guy attacks you, but in certain situation, it's useful. If you go enough in the sympathetic state, you will activate the freeze mechanism, right? That is not something you can stop like that. Once you're there, your body is very strong in that position, will not let you. That's when people go in the fetus position to find something else. It's very, very hard to fight that, because it's a physiological response. It's not weakness on your part to freeze. Right. That's the thing people think. It's a thing, they're so strong mentally that they will never freeze. The problem is it has nothing to do with your mental strength. It has everything to do with your physiology. If you get scared enough, you will go past fight, you will go past flight, you will go into freeze. And once you're there, you're in trouble.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, because one of the hardest reframes I've had, especially in a community that's made up of type A personalities, is to tell them to embrace the startle flinch, because if you accept it, you can convert it faster. If you think it's effeminate or warrior like, then you reject it, and now you have another battle going on. Instead of incorporating what your body wants to do naturally, reflexively, it's this. I joke and I say it's the 80,000-year-old survival reflex, and I say 80,000. Of course, Yeah, it's much older, but I joke about it. I remember somebody at a seminar saying I had a T-shirt that said "Caveman Combatives established 80,000 BC," and so everyone would joke. And then some guy sitting in the seminar, grabs his phone and he says, "Hey, I'm not trying to be a contrarian, but here I'm on Wikipedia, and he goes." He says, there's like the first spear is like 400,000 years old. Why do you say 80? And I'm like, shit. I'm thinking, did I just like print a bunch of shirts with the wrong fucking date? Oh yeah.
Yeah, but it's funny, so fuck it.
Yeah. So, but what I said, Julien, was funny. I said, hold on a second, maybe the shirts are on sale. And I said, oh, now I remember why. And because I'd done some research, and what we discovered was there were tribes evolving all over the world at the same time, but it was approximately 80,000 years ago that modern man began exploring the planet Earth. And fighting before that was against wild animals. The spear was developed for hunting.
Not each other.
And it was about 80,000 years ago where, now it's like The Walking Dead, where you're hanging out, you just finished fishing and you look up on the ridge and there's another group of people with spears. Yeah. And I said, you know what? Because I'm teaching a mano personal defense system, it's 80,000. That's when grabbing heads, sticking thumbs in eyes, grabbing hair and ears, and there's suddenly that the wrestling, the original wrestling as a combat sport, 80,000 years old. Interesting stuff. What else are you working on? This is fascinating. We could talk for hours on that. I try to keep these, I book them for 90 in case it goes that long, but I know people's attention and busy, and I would rather inspire them to look you up and get more training. What else are you working on? You obviously have different training blocks, from an end user course to you do trainer development and internships and mentoring, and
my big thing is, you like to deal with fear and stuff like that. My thing is leading with learning.
Okay.
That's really what I do, is I teach people how to learn, in a way. Principle over methods, if you want. So there's something fascinating that happened on December 6, 2017, so a month ago, right? There's a AlphaZero played Stockfish. So I'm going to explain to you what that means. Stockfish is the leading chess engine that is a world champion. He has beat every human, every computer out there. So it's basically the strongest chess player machine in the world, beats everybody. And Google, like a few years back, a year ago, 2 years ago, acquired a company called DeepMind, which creates artificial intelligence, right? And they created a program that is called Alpha, that they basically sent to try to play players at different games, because that's the best way to create an artificial intelligence. And their latest artificial intelligence, right, is called AlphaZero. So what's very interesting is they gave AlphaZero, basically, the way this works is a generalized artificial intelligence. So it's not designed for chess, it's just designed to learn, right? And so he gave AlphaZero the rules of chess and said, go ahead, play yourself. And AlphaZero played itself and learned from every game. He played itself for 4 hours, right? And he was sent to play Stockfish. Stockfish, you have to understand, it's been 20 years where they've been trying to make it stronger and stronger and stronger. It can analyze 70 million positions per second.
Huh.
Okay, so he has every game played by the grandmasters. He has the openings tables. He has the endgame tables. He has everything we have. So Stockfish is the epitome of what he calls supervised learning, which is the epitome of memorization and brute force. That's how he wins, by memorization and analyzing every position to see if he can gain an advantage. So it's really a grinding machine, right? AlphaZero is completely different. AlphaZero could only calculate 80,000 positions per second. So it's 1,000 times weaker. What he has, though, he has learned throughout the process that is called reinforcement learning. AlphaZero was sent after 4 hours to play Stockfish, and he beat it 28-0.
Holy shit.
And that is not even that. It's the way he played it. You have to understand that AlphaZero played like a human being. He made early sacrifices to gain long-term advantages in position. That is the way people think. Sacrifices for long-term positional play. Then once he got the positional play, he started to basically cramp stockfish in where he barely couldn't move, and he started squeezing and squeezing, suffocating stockfish, making it look like a kid. So it was ridiculous. But so people are always talking about Skynet because Terminator is coming.
Right.
What they have missed is that reinforcement learning, the way you teach reinforcement learning basically is, for example, it's learning from your own mistakes. AlphaZero never memorized anybody else's game. He only played itself. So he only learned from his own mistakes, nobody else. What he does after that is he has to introduce an element of randomness, because the only way you learn new stuff is by trying new shit.
Right.
And then sometimes it doesn't work. You learn from that. If it works, you keep going. But the reason he doesn't need 70 million positions per second is because he doesn't memorize anything. He learns the lesson from the game and then he forgets the game. How human is that? That you have to get the essence of an experience and then forget the experience itself, because otherwise it's going to influence the next experience you're going to go into. And that would be bad, since the next experience is not the experience you're having right now. So you can never remember this experience to gauge the next one. Otherwise, positive or negative will influence the next experience without knowing if it will be a positive or negative one, right? So basically, AlphaZero learn by getting the principles out of every game, but never memorizing the game. He learned to do random stuff, that to basically become better, you have to try new shit. And he had to learn from his own mistakes. So that means that for the last 20 years, we've been teaching a machine how to beat us, which has forced most of the grandmasters to learn to think like a machine, but a faulty machine. But once we told the machine to teach itself, it told us that being human was the way to go.
I love it.
So how cool is that? By the way, the epitome of supervised learning is school. School is telling you that doing random, like trying stuff on your own, is wrong, because you get a B, you get a D, right? They are telling you, memorize what I say. I'm right, you're wrong, because you're a kid, basically. Whereas AlphaZero is telling us that the only way to be human is to learn from our own mistakes, is to not dwell on the past. Success or failure, you got to forget, just get the lessons out of it and move on. And you have to try new shit continuously. A computer just told a machine, an AI just told us that being human is the way to go.
I love it. Is that your interpretation, or this is like experts have debriefed and that was their?
Oh, I don't know.
Because I agree.
The philosophy of it, but like I can tell you, the chess world right now was revolutionized. They will not play the same way because stockfish got crushed.
Right.
Magnus Carlsen, who's a world champion of human players, always say playing stockfish is playing an idiot that crushes you every time.
Right.
Because he played like a stupid grinding, but just gets you because he can win by brute force. Well, AlphaZero had a panache, had a positional understanding, a long-term understanding of the game of chess. That was the correct way to play chess, just extremely well. But that was almost like a human way. So it shows us that we've been right in the way we've been playing chess. Stockfish was wrong. It was just too powerful to be proven wrong until that AI came about. So this will show you that reinforcement learning is stronger than supervised learning.
How do you take that? First of all, I agree in many ways, and this is, you're my guest on here. I don't need to talk about this, but this is totally resonates with how we teach. Everything is based on a scenario. We reverse engineer the scenario, and we work on what I call primal, protective, and tactical outcomes. So you explore what happens when you don't pay attention to pre-contact cues. What happens when you put yourself in this compromised position? How do you handle adversity? We have talks about the emotional, psychological, physical systems, and we build the training out so that the student goes. In the class, it's very Socratic. Like, hey, can I do this? I don't know. Is it working? Then yes, you can do that. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're not teaching patterns. One of our maxims is, careful what you practice. You might get really good at the wrong thing. And
because you're memorizing. Yeah.
Right. And, your favorite move might trigger his best counter. You need to be adaptive. You need to flow. So I'm right on line with that. I got goosebumps when you're explaining that because it inspires me and excites me. How do you take that and make it transcendent in your, like I tell people, you know, when you come to my self-defense course, it's the course has value and it's teaching you how to handle life. It's how to look at the obstacles in your life and manage fear. And I do it transcendent through self-defense. It sounds like you're doing the same thing through your program, where someone might come to you thinking or mistakenly thinking it's simply another fitness modality, but it's really way bigger than that.
It's way past that, yeah. But you know, like, so they gave us an algorithm. It's called Q-learning. Computer science has been studying that for a long time now. It's called Q-learning. Q-learning has an algorithm that starts with basically your current state. It talks about the learning rate, right?
Okay.
Reward versus value, because there's the reward as a scoring system. So this is how it goes. It goes the current state, right, plus the learning rate, and then you open the parenthesis, and it's reward plus randomness plus optimize future value minus current state. So what does that mean? Current state. So that I can go on for hours on this one.
Yeah, no, I love it.
Current state. So Q learning, what is it about? It's state versus action. Right. So from a human perspective, what does that mean? For example, it means from a fitness perspective, like if you are in an improper state, there is no action that can be taken that will give to a good result. So what does that mean for fitness? That means, for example, external torque and internal torque. When you do a hinge or a conventional deadlift, you're supposed to be in internal torque. That would be the state to be in, right? So if you're in the wrong state, so if you're in external torque, you might look like you're doing the deadlift correctly, but you will always hurt yourself. Why? Because the state you're in is incorrect. There is no action past that state that can lead to good results. Even though, so you're going to look like you're doing it right, but you're going to fuck yourself up every time. And people are like, how come? I look good. You look good, but you're in the wrong state. So it's state versus action. You always have to be in the proper state to act correctly.
And
if you want to, that's what you talk about.
Yeah. For the listeners, when you say state, you're talking about sympathetic and parasympathetic.
In that case, it would be that, which equals to a torque chain.
Right.
So, for example, for you, for fighting, the state you're in will decide how you fight. If you're scared because you're going to be in bush, you're going to go both hands.
Right.
If you're not scared, then you can punch with one arm. So then it will affect the bilateral versus unilateral we talked about.
Right.
So the nervous system you're going to be in, sympathetic versus parasympathetic, is going to decide the actions you're going to take. So therefore, if I'm scared shitless, I will not be able to punch with one arm. So if I train just punching with one arm, it will never allow me in an ambush. Why? Because I'm not in the state correct for the training that I did.
Right. And what's interesting,
what you do.
What's interesting with, and I want to go back to what you were saying, but you know, a lot of people who follow the show are cops, military, firefighter, CrossFitters, self-defense, all sorts. What's interesting is like a lot of fighters, boxers, amateur, professional, depending on the opponent, depending on the threat, that becomes the movie in their mind. You'll see people gas really early, even though, you know, they're 4% body fat, they did their road work, they did everything, and people don't understand why the guy can't kick, why his legs feel like they're 50 pounds. And even though it looks like he's dancing around, he's throwing a punch, you can see he's much slower than when he's warming up in the changing room. And what I want people, and please add to this, what I want people to understand is what Julien's bringing into the conversation for us to meditate on here, is that fighter goes out and really it was a facade of confidence. They needed to be in parasympathetic where they could dance around and float like a butterfly. Exactly. But inside, their sympathetic nervous system said, no, you're not there yet. And because they were in this.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah, what that sympathetic state is telling them is push with both hands, kick with both legs, and jump up. And so by now here's what I was getting at. If there's no harmonious tension between kinesthetic perception and emotional psychological, that punch that you're firing out there is draining your energy systems, which is reinforcing greater psychological fear, right? Like Lombardi's expression, fatigue makes cowards of us all. And, it's a very interesting discussion because, but anyways, I cut you off there because you made me think about the relationship to fighting there. No, we're freestyling. That's why I like it.
Yeah.
That's the key. And plus, you have to understand. So I was linking the nervous system to a torque chains.
Right.
That means the sympathetic is external torque. So you've been punching in internal torque. when you're in the sympathetic, you can't do that. You're going to go to our external torque, which is what you teach, which is this way, which is creating tension toward the outside. A punch is internal torque. That means that in a highly sympathetic nervous state of action, a state, you're not going to be able to do internal torque properly. And that's why that punch is so slow. Right. Because you can't use the same muscles anymore. You've trained a certain way and you cannot use that training. And that's why the punch is slow, because it's a different muscle group you're using now. It has affected all the way to which muscle you are using. Right. Which tension you're creating. And that's why you can't create the proper tension, because you're not in the same state that you were training in.
I dig it. And
so it changes everything.
Go back to your you were talking about kind of the philosophical progression of if somebody said, okay, I got to explore this more, somebody training with you, how do they get involved? Where does it start?
Well, for me, I can't coach you if you cannot learn.
Right.
So I'm going to explain to you like the philosophical aspect of that Q learning stuff, which is, for example, there's different things like reward versus value, right? Reward, the way we feel, is only a scoring system. That is just the way the body has to say, this is good, this isn't. Let's imagine I'm talking about food. Ice cream tastes great. Okay, that doesn't mean there is value in that food. There is reward, but there is no value. If you think reward is the goal, then you're only going to eat ice cream. Just because it tastes good only means that. It only means it tastes good. It does not mean it has value. Value is long run kind of thing. So you have to understand that just because something feels good or bad does not affect its value. So there's a difference between reward, that right away, oh, that felt good, oh, that felt bad, which is a scoring system, versus value, which is what you're trying to shoot for. So there's the problem. Most people think the reward is the goal. Well, actually, the goal is the value. So that's very important, because that means some workout you like, some workout you don't. That has nothing to do with what you're going to get in the long term based on that. So there has to be something they understand there. So that's long term versus short term. So obviously the why you're training, if you had an epiphany out of being healthy or not, is going to matter a lot, right? But it's very important to understand reward versus value. And then after that, it's the need for randomness. Because the need for randomness, like imagine you're in a maze, right? You're a mouse, you're trying to get to the cheese at the end of the maze. In that maze, there's a bunch of watering holes and there's a bunch of zappers. Okay, so if you just look at the reward versus value, the reward is to get to the watering hole, because it's better than getting zapped. So you go out there, you get zapped, you go there, you go watering hole, you're going to stay in the watering hole because out there are zappers. The problem is you're never going to get to the cheese. The only way to get to the cheese is to do random shit. Right. Is to try new path. If you try a new path, once in a while, you're going to get zapped. That's just the way it is. Those are not mistakes. Those are necessary steps in order to find the cheese. You have to accept that mistakes are not failures. That is just a step where you learn, okay, I'm not going that way. This is what Edison said. I didn't fail. I just found 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb. Right. But guess what? Those 1,000 experiences maybe helped him create something else. So there is no fail experience. There is just, that is not the way to deal with my environment right this second. Maybe it will be tomorrow, maybe 6 months from now I can do that. Just at this second, this is not the proper way to deal with my environment. So there are no mistakes in that sense. Or at least it's okay to make mistakes. It's just another experience that you're going to get the lesson from so that you can use it, if not now, later. But the only way you're going to get the cheese is by doing random stuff and accepting the fact that not all of them are going to work out. So that means that stop memorizing what I'm saying. Don't do things because I said so. I want you people to go out there to try the stuff and say he's right or he's wrong. Maybe he's crazy, maybe he's not, but you're going to figure it out. Stop memorizing what I say. Stop doing things because people told you to, because that is not your way. That is my way. That is how I deal with my environment. That is not your environment. And I'm in a specific state. So the point of all this was do random shit, try new things, because then you'll figure out how to do it for yourself. The only way you get the cheese is by following your way, not mine. And that's extremely important. That's part of basically the element of randomness that is so necessary in life. And again, and the last state is forget your current state. And that to me is probably the most important, at least for me personally, is that I cannot let failures or successes influence how I'm going to react to the next situation. That would be living in the past or living in the future. Forgetting your current state is telling you live in the present. Forget what happens. That's what AlphaZero did. He never remembered any of the game he played. He just got the lesson from every game and then forgot the game. That is the strongest thing you can do in life, is to never be influenced for the next situation by the previous situation. I'm not saying never learn from what happened. I'm saying learn from what happened, but then forget it happened. Your body remembers. Your body has dealt with that situation in a sympathetic state or parasympathetic. He has learned something. Move on to the next one. But forget it happened. Otherwise, it will taint the way of the next experience, and that is most likely a bad thing. And on top of it, it makes people passive because it makes them go into a new situation. They fuck up and they go, it's okay, I can fuck up. I'll remember for the next one. No, you won't, because for the next one, you're going to remember the previous state, which is not the same state you're in now. So now you're going to fuck up the next one and the next one and the next one. And so it gets you into a pattern of basically failures because you cannot learn from that, because instead of dealing with the situation right now and trying to see what is happening and dealing with it right now, I'm going to memorize what happened right now and apply it to the next one. You can't do that. The only time you can learn the lesson is as it happens.
Right.
As it happens, deal with the situation, learn from that situation by trying to deal with it, right? But it's only by dealing with it that you learn from the situation. If you say, oh, it's all good, you just try to memorize it, you've never dealt with it. And now you take that shit into the next one and the next one and the next one, and you never learn anything. The only way you learn is by dealing with it, maybe getting your ass kicked, maybe feeling you didn't do well, but you dealt with it. So now you learn the lesson, forget it happened, success or failure, and go deal with the next one with a fresh mind. And now you can learn. And now, most importantly, you learn your way. Because the only person who can do that your way is you. Nobody else can give you anything but educated guidelines. So that's the thing I tell them is like, I'm not here to give you information. I'm here to give you knowledge. So I'm going to teach you how to do it. I don't want to tell you what to do. I want to tell you how to do it. Because that's my job, is to give you knowledge. So that when you leave, you know how to fix yourself instead of asking me every time how to do it.
Nice.
And that's important.
Teaching people how to think and how to be their own coach by understanding principles and
with our methods.
Yeah. No, I love the whole thing. I tell people, we're not teaching techniques. We teach tools and targets. We teach you how to move. We teach you how to think. We're options facilitators. We'll never tell you what to do. At the end of the day, some days you're the bug and some days you're the windshield, and you just got to pick yourself up and keep going.
It's exactly. So see, all this, right? We all know all this. This is how humans learn. We've just been tricked by school and industrial revolution into thinking we do better as machines, which is not true. The machines were faulty because we programmed them, which is why I love the whole chess thing, because the machine that programmed itself just told us we were right to be human.
Right. I love that. I got to look that up. I got to research that. I made a bunch of notes.
It's fascinating.
And made a bunch of notes. How do people get in touch with you, man? That was an epic rant. I love that. I want to kind of, you got everyone up into their sympathetic nervous state there. Like, yes, let's learn. And this is really, guys, listening to this. This is hopefully as inspiring to you as it is to me. This shit fires me up. What I want you, as far as the takeaway here, is just, to learn to use more of your brain to become a better version of you, to continually reinvent yourself and give up what you were. So sometimes I talk to people and in my courses, because we mostly deal with law enforcement, military, and so on and so forth. And I'm like, who here's won a fight? Who here's lost a fight? And you get the show of hands. And I always tell people, like, so moving forward, are you training for your last fight? Or are you training for your next fight? Because what a lot of people do, win or lose, is they're still fixating on their last fight.
Exactly.
And so I'm excited to learn more from you and to study more of your stuff. I got a whole list of YouTube videos I want to watch here. But how can people who are just finding out about you from our show, what's the best way to get in touch with you? Where, online, website?
Online. So my website is strongfit.com. So
Okay.
they can check that out. On YouTube, it's StrongFit. And on Instagram, it's StrongFit1. So they
Beautiful.
can find me on Instagram or look on YouTube. I have a lot of videos on YouTube. I put most of my stuff out there for free. It's on my YouTube channel, on my Instagram. So
Right.
they can see all this whenever they want.
Beautiful. And you're on the road all the time. You live on the road, as you said.
Yeah.
When you do seminars, are they 1 day, 2 day? Are you just doing workshops?
They
How's
are
that work?
2-day seminar.
Okay.
So I have a two-day seminar, Saturday, Sunday. And then during the week, usually after the seminar, I have a week-long workshop, week-long, Monday through Thursday,
Right.
about 8 hours a day, where we just pound the principles of StrongFit and the movements to teach you to target the parasympathetic and internal torque or the sympathetic and external torque.
Right. And
so it's a lot of how, basically.
Nice. I love it. I love it. Julien, I can't wait for us to meet in person and share some coffee or a beer.
Yeah. Yes.
And we'll be in touch. What I'll do is after the show, I'll hit you up with some more information, and we'll see what our schedules can intersect. And this was exciting, man. I was like I've got a page of notes here and a whole bunch of Googling I got to do. And that's that's part of the lesson is always be a student, everybody. Always be a student. And
always.
Any final thoughts, man? I mean, you were on fire today. I dig it.
I'm always like this.
It's inspiring.
I'm going to be in the States in April, and I would love to meet you. I've been following your stuff for a very long time, so I would love to actually meet you.
Yeah.
I've been in martial arts my whole life. I was a fighter when there was no money in MMA, but I've done grappling, boxing my entire life. So I've been following what you do for a long time. So I can't wait to meet you. Nice,
man. That's very exciting. Cool. Well, we'll wrap here, and I'll be posting this soon, and hopefully you'll turn on and open a bunch of minds.
I hope so.
Thank you, Julien. Be safe. Take care.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. You too.
Thank you. Bye.